A woman in my neighborhood did the unthinkable. She cut a fire hose while firefighters were battling a massive blaze. Yes, you heard that right. This HOA Karen actually severed an active fire hose, all because she didn't want fire trucks damaging her precious lawn. The water pressure dropped instantly, putting homes and lives at serious risk. But what our community did next, it left the entire city speechless. We turned this HOA nightmare into something remarkable. This incident changed forever how we deal with entitled neighbors, and taught Karen a lesson she'll never forget. The justice that followed was both swift and poetic. HOA nightmare stories don't get more shocking than this. Evergreen Valley isn't just any suburban neighborhood. It's a picture-perfect community that could be ripped straight from a real estate brochure. Pristine streets wind between manicured lawns. Towering maple trees create a lush canopy over sidewalks where children ride bikes without fear. Two-story homes all painted in carefully approved shades of beige, sage, and taupe stand in perfect harmony. The neighborhood's perfection, however, comes at a price. One of the strictest homeowners associations in the county. The Evergreen Valley HOA Rulebook? It's thicker than the Bible. Residents must adhere to regulations governing everything from the exact height of grass to 5 inches. No more, no less, to which day trash cans can appear at the curb, never before 6 p.m. the evening prior to collection. The Architectural Review Committee meets bi-weekly to approve or more often reject requests for exterior modifications. Want to paint your front door red? Prepare for a 3-month approval process and likely disappointment. At the center of this regulatory storm stands Karen Wilkinson, a 50-something woman with highlighted hair perpetually styled in an asymmetrical bob. Karen wasn't officially elected to the HOA board. She's merely a self-appointed community standards enforcer. Her daily routine is militaristic in precision. Coffee at 7 a.m., followed by a slow drive through the neighborhood in her immaculate white Lexus SUV, clipboard in hand, documenting violations. Your hydrangeas are encroaching on the sidewalk by 3 inches, she'd inform one neighbor. Those solar lights aren't from the approved vendor list, she'd tell another. Karen's phone contains hundreds of photos documenting neighborhood infractions. A basketball hoop left out overnight, a garden gnome that exceeded height restrictions, holiday decorations displayed 1 day past the allowed period. Her email signature even includes a quote, "Standards aren't just guidelines. They're the foundation of property values." Into this meticulously controlled environment moved Ethan Parker, a 32-year-old software engineer who recently accepted a position at a nearby tech company. With his wife Mia and their 5-year-old daughter Lily, Ethan was drawn to Evergreen Valley for its excellent schools and safe streets. Their modern furniture and casual lifestyle seemed a perfect fit for the contemporary home they purchased on Maple Lane. "This neighborhood feels so peaceful," Ethan remarked to Mia on moving day. "I think we're going to be really happy here." That optimism lasted precisely 3 days until Karen appeared at their doorstep with a friendly neighborhood welcome that quickly devolved into a 45-minute lecture about proper trash can placement. "I'm just helping you avoid fines," Karen explained with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. The previous owners were constantly violating regulations. "I'd hate to see that happen to such a nice young family." The confrontations escalated as summer approached. California's drought conditions worsened, and wildfire warnings became a daily feature on local news. The HOA board, responding to county recommendations, sent an email blast instructing all residents to clear dry brush and dead vegetation from their properties. Ethan spent an entire weekend removing dead plants, trimming bushes, and clearing the perimeter of his property. He even installed a drip irrigation system to conserve water while maintaining necessary moisture. But his efforts weren't good enough for Karen. "You've created bare patches in your landscaping," she informed him, appearing suddenly as he worked in the yard. "That's a violation of Section 7.3 of the Landscaping Code, and those drought-resistant plants aren't on the approved vegetation list." "But the HOA email specifically asked us to remove fire hazards," Ethan countered, wiping sweat from his brow. Karen's smile tightened further. "Rules are rules, Mr. Parker. I'll be documenting this for the next board meeting." As Ethan watched Karen march away, clipboard clutched to her chest, he felt a growing unease. The neighborhood's perfect facade was beginning to crack, revealing something darker beneath the surface. Little did he know that Karen's obsession with rules would soon escalate from annoying to dangerous, with consequences that would reshape the entire community. The summer heat wave gripping Evergreen Valley had stretched into its third merciless week. Temperatures soared past 100 degrees for 5 consecutive days, turning the once lush landscape into a tinderbox of brittle grass and parched soil. Fire warnings blared from every news channel. Residents nervously eyed the dry hills surrounding their perfect neighborhood, knowing that one spark could change everything. That spark came on a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan was working from home when he first smelled the smoke. A quick glance out his upstairs office window confirmed his fears. A plume of gray-black smoke rose from the eastern edge of the neighborhood, where Evergreen Valley met the nature preserve. He immediately dialed 911, though several neighbors had already reported the fire. "Daddy, what's happening?" Lily asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit as Ethan hurried downstairs. "Just a small fire, sweetie. The firefighters will take care of it," he reassured her, though the knot in his stomach tightened as he watched the smoke thicken. Within minutes, the wail of sirens filled the air. 3 fire engines roared into the neighborhood, red lights flashing against the cookie-cutter homes. Captain James Miller, a 20-year veteran of the department, quickly assessed the situation. The fire had started small, likely from a discarded cigarette, but was spreading rapidly through the dry brush at the neighborhood's edge. "We need to establish a perimeter," Miller shouted to his team. "Johnson, Taylor, get the hose connected to that hydrant." He pointed to a fire hydrant prominently situated at the corner of Karen Wilkinson's meticulously maintained property. The firefighters moved with practiced efficiency, unrolling the heavy hose across Karen's emerald lawn, the only grass still perfectly green despite water restrictions. The hose left a winding trail across her prized Kentucky bluegrass, flattening the blades that she religiously measured each week. Karen was in her kitchen when she spotted the intrusion through her bay window. Her coffee cup clattered against the granite countertop as she gasped in horror. Without even pausing to slip on shoes, she bolted outside, her face contorted with rage. "What do you think YOURE doing?" she shrieked, rushing toward the firefighters who were connecting the hose to the hydrant. "Get off my property right now!" Captain Miller turned, momentarily stunned by the interruption. Smoke billowed behind him, ash particles already drifting onto the pristine homes. "Ma'am, we're responding to a fire. We need access to this hydrant. I don't care about your fire." "Look what you're doing to my lawn," Karen gestured wildly at the hose track. "Do you know how much I spend on lawn care? This is private property." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the confrontation with disbelief. Ethan stood at his driveway, Lily's hand clutched in his, unable to process what he was witnessing. "Ma'am," Captain Miller said firmly, his patience visibly straining, "this is an emergency situation. That hydrant is public infrastructure, and we have legal right to access it. Lives and homes could be at risk." Use another hydrant. There's one 2 blocks down. Karen pointed vaguely down the street. We don't have time for this, Miller said, turning back to his team. Continue operations. Johnson, get that water flowing. Karen's face flushed crimson as water began surging through the hose. She stormed back toward her house, shouting over her shoulder, You'll be hearing from my lawyer. This is trespassing. As the firefighters focused on containing the growing blaze, Karen slipped into her garage. Her hands trembled with indignation as she yanked open her garden storage cabinet. Her eyes landed on her premium titanium garden shears, the ones she used to maintain her award-winning rose bushes at precisely 24 inches tall. Outside, the firefighters had established their line, directing powerful jets of water at the advancing flames. The neighborhood watched anxiously as the crew battled to keep the fire from reaching the first row of homes. No one noticed Karen creeping along the side of her house, garden shears clutched in her white-knuckled grip. She waited until the firefighters were focused entirely on the blaze. Then, with shocking speed for a woman in her 50s, Karen darted to where the hose crossed her backyard. Without hesitation, she plunged the shears into the thick rubber. The first cut didn't penetrate completely. Karen grunted, applying more pressure, her designer capris soaking as water began spurting from the partial breach. With one final effort, she severed the hose entirely. Water exploded outward in a violent geyser, drenching Karen and creating an instant mud pit in her perfect lawn. More importantly, the critical water pressure to the firefighting team instantly dropped to nothing. "What the hell?" Captain Miller shouted as his hose went limp. "We've lost pressure!" "Check the line." Firefighter Taylor raced back along the hose path, following it around Karen's house. He stopped short at the sight of Karen, standing defiantly beside the severed hose, garden shears still in hand, completely soaked but wearing an expression of grim satisfaction. "Captain," Taylor shouted into his radio, "someone cut the hose!" Intentionally. In the momentary lapse of firefighting capability, the flames surged forward, engulfing the fence of the nearest home. Residents gasped collectively. As reality set, this wasn't just a brush fire anymore. Their homes were now directly threatened. Captain Miller sprinted to the scene, his face darkening with fury when he saw Karen. "Did you do this?" he demanded, though the evidence was undeniable. "This is my property," Karen replied, her voice eerily calm despite the chaos. "I warned you about trespassing." Miller grabbed his radio. "Dispatch. I need police at my location immediately. We have an individual who has intentionally sabotaged emergency equipment during an active fire response." Ethan had followed the firefighter, wanting to help. He stood frozen in disbelief at the scene before him. "Karen," he managed, "people could die." "What were you thinking?" Karen turned to him, water dripping from her designer bob. "Rules exist for a reason, Mr. Parker. No exceptions, not even for them." She gestured dismissively toward the firefighters who were now rushing to reroute to another hydrant. As if to punctuate her madness, a massive oak tree at the edge of the development caught fire with a whoosh, sending a column of flame 30 feet into the air. Screams erupted from the gathered neighbors. The consequences of Karen's action were now unfolding in real time, and the peaceful facade of Evergreen Valley was about to be changed forever. The arrest of Karen Wilkinson became instant neighborhood lore. 2 police officers had led her away in handcuffs, her designer clothes still dripping wet, her perfectly highlighted hair plastered against her face. The charges were severe: felony interference with emergency personnel, vandalism of public safety equipment, and reckless endangerment. As she was placed in the back of the police cruiser, Karen maintained her rigid posture, chin lifted defiantly, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of her actions. Meanwhile, the firefighters had scrambled to connect to another hydrant 3 blocks away. Those crucial lost minutes allowed the flames to claim 2 storage sheds and severely damage the Peterson family's back deck before the crew regained control. By nightfall, the fire was contained, but the neighborhood's sense of security had been thoroughly incinerated. The following morning, Evergreen Valley awoke to a changed landscape. Ash dusted the immaculate lawns. The eastern edge of the community stood blackened and charred. Yellow caution tape cordoned off damaged areas. But the physical damage paled in comparison to the psychological burn that seared through the community's consciousness. "She could have killed someone," Daniel Harris said, standing in his driveway as neighbors gathered in small, stunned clusters. Daniel, a retired engineer with a salt and pepper beard and calm demeanor, had lived in Evergreen Valley for 15 years. All because firefighters had the audacity to use a public hydrant that happened to be near her precious lawn. Ethan nodded grimly. "I still can't believe what I saw. Who does something like that?" "Someone who's forgotten what actually matters," Daniel replied, his voice heavy with disappointment. "This neighborhood, we've allowed rules to become more important than people." The conversation might have ended there, just another shocked exchange between neighbors processing a traumatic event. But Daniel Harris wasn't finished. That evening, he drafted an email and sent it to every resident in the Evergreen Valley directory. "Fellow neighbors, yesterday's events have forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth about our community. While we pride ourselves on our beautiful homes and manicured lawns, we've lost sight of what truly makes a neighborhood safe, supporting those who protect us. I propose we channel our collective shock into action. Let's raise funds to purchase cutting-edge firefighting equipment for our local station, specifically cut-resistant hoses and rapid connect hydrant systems that can be deployed with minimal property disruption. This isn't just about making amends for one resident's inexcusable behavior. It's about recommitting to values that actually matter: safety, community, and genuine care for one another. If you're interested in contributing, please join me tomorrow at 7 p.m. in the Community Park Pavilion." Daniel Harris. Daniel expected perhaps a dozen people to show up. Instead, when he arrived at the park pavilion the following evening, he found nearly 80 residents waiting, almost half the neighborhood. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows. Someone had brought a portable microphone system. Ethan Parker stood near the front, having helped organize the impromptu gathering. "I wasn't expecting such a turnout," Daniel admitted as he approached the makeshift podium. "People are ready for change," Ethan replied quietly. "Karen's actions were extreme, but they've made us all take a hard look at what we've been prioritizing around here." Daniel nodded and stepped up to address the crowd. The evening air was still warm, carrying the lingering scent of smoke, a potent reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. "Thank you all for coming," Daniel began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "2 days ago, we witnessed something unconscionable in our community. But rather than simply condemning one person's actions, I believe we should examine the culture that helped create them." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. For too long, we've allowed property values and aesthetic perfection to overshadow human connection. We've enforced rules about grass height while forgetting to check if our elderly neighbors need help during heat waves. We've sent violation notices about holiday decorations while failing to welcome newcomers properly. Several HOA board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one interrupted. "Tonight, I'm proposing 2 initiatives," Daniel continued. "First, Let's raise funds to purchase state-of-the-art firefighting equipment for Station 12, the men and women who risk their lives to protect us. And second, let's commit to reforming our HOA to prioritize community welfare over cosmetic perfection. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. One by one, residents stood to voice their support. Margaret Chen, a typically quiet accountant, pledged $500 in the spot. The Rodriguez family offered to host a block party fundraiser. Even HOA President Richard Thornton acknowledged that certain regulations had become perhaps overzealous and promised to review the rulebook. By the end of the evening, they had collected over $4,000 in initial pledges and formed 3 committees: fundraising, HOA reform, and community outreach. Ethan volunteered to create a website and digital payment system for donations. The following 2 weeks witnessed a transformation in Evergreen Valley. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged curt nods now engaged in lengthy conversations. Children played freely on lawns without parents anxiously checking for HOA violations. The fundraising thermometer, displayed in the community center lobby, climbed steadily: $6, $0.8, $0, $10,000. Captain Miller and his crew were invited to a community dinner where they received a standing ovation and heartfelt apologies for Karen's behavior. The captain, visibly moved, explained which equipment would best serve their needs. Cut-resistant hoses would be invaluable, he explained, and rapid deployment hydrant systems could save precious minutes during an emergency, while minimizing impact on residential properties. 14 days after the fire, Daniel Harris stood beside Captain Miller in the community park. Before them stretched a sea of faces. Nearly every resident of Evergreen Valley had turned out for the presentation ceremony. Ethan Parker handed Daniel an oversized check for $12,347. On behalf of Evergreen Valley, Daniel announced, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "We present this donation to Station 12. May it help you continue your heroic work safely and effectively." As Captain Miller accepted the check, thunderous applause erupted. But the ceremony wasn't over. Richard Thornton stepped forward, holding a thick binder that everyone recognized as the HOA rulebook. "We've also made some changes," Richard announced, holding up the binder. "Effective immediately, our community standards have been revised. Emergency services will have unrestricted access to all public infrastructure. We've eliminated 17 pages of cosmetic regulations. And we're establishing a community welfare committee to ensure we're looking after each other, not just our property values." He paused, then added with a small smile, "We're also installing a memorial bench by the eastern entrance, not to commemorate the fire, but to remind us of the day Evergreen Valley rediscovered its heart." As the crowd dispersed, Ethan found himself standing next to Daniel. "You know what's ironic?" Ethan said quietly. "Karen always claimed she was protecting property values. But real estate agents are already saying our neighborhood's reputation has improved since we started focusing on being a true community." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us what truly matters." In the distance, workers were installing the new Rapid Connect hydrant system, sleek, efficient, and designed to deploy with minimal lawn disruption. But no one in Evergreen Valley was particularly concerned about their grass anymore. They had discovered something far more valuable to cultivate. The legal consequences for Karen Wilkinson were swift and severe. The district attorney, facing public pressure and clear evidence, pursued the case with unusual vigor. Karen's expensive attorney argued for leniency, citing her previously unblemished record and momentary lapse in judgment, but the judge remained unmoved. The sentence, 6 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, and $25,000 in restitution to the fire department and affected homeowners. Local media covered the sentencing extensively. The headline in the Evergreen Valley Gazette read, "HOA vigilante gets jail time for cutting fire hose." The story spread beyond local news, with several national outlets picking it up as a cautionary tale about HOA culture gone wrong. Karen's face, once known only to neighbors, became briefly infamous across the country. When Karen returned to Evergreen Valley after serving her sentence, she found a neighborhood transformed not just in policy, but in spirit. Her immaculate Tudor-style home, once her pride and joy, had lost its luster during her absence. The lawn, deprived of her obsessive care, had grown patchy and uneven. Weeds had infiltrated her prized rose garden. Under normal circumstances, such neglect would have triggered a flurry of HOA violations, but the new board had more important priorities than cosmetic perfection. Karen's first venture outside was to collect her mail, which had accumulated despite her sister's occasional visits to check on the house. She stepped tentatively onto her front porch, shoulders hunched as if expecting projectiles. Instead, she faced something perhaps more painful: complete indifference. Neighbors who spotted her simply turned away. Parents gently redirected their children to avoid walking past her house. When Karen attended the quarterly HOA meeting, hoping to voice concerns about declining standards, she found herself sitting alone in the back row, a conspicuous empty circle of chairs surrounding her like an invisible barrier. "This community has moved on," Richard Thornton told her firmly when she approached him after the meeting. "You're welcome to stay, of course, but the rules you once championed no longer define us." Meanwhile, the changes Daniel Harris had initiated continued to flourish. The annual neighborhood picnic, once a stiff, sparsely attended affair, now sprawled across the entire community park. Children darted between blankets and lawn chairs while adults chatted comfortably, many forming friendships with neighbors they'd previously only nodded to in passing. The highlight of summer came when Station 12 brought their fire trucks for a community safety day. Captain Miller and his crew demonstrated the new equipment purchased with the neighborhood's donations. Children climbed excitedly into the cabs, while parents learned proper fire extinguisher technique. The rapid connect hydrant systems gleamed in the sunlight, a visible reminder of community resilience. These systems reduced deployment time by nearly 40%, Captain Miller explained to the gathered crowd. In a fire situation, that could mean the difference between saving a home and losing it completely. As the demonstration concluded, Captain Miller asked for a moment of attention. The crowd quieted, parents gently shushing excited children. "What happened here last year could have ended in tragedy," he said, his voice carrying across the park. "Instead, this community transformed a destructive act into something constructive. You've not only made our jobs safer, but demonstrated what it truly means to be neighbors." Evergreen Valley isn't just a model for fire safety. Now, it's a model for community response to adversity. The applause was thunderous, punctuated by cheers and whistles. From her living room window, Karen watched the celebration unfold. She could see Ethan Parker's daughter, Lily, wearing a plastic firefighter helmet and beaming as she sat atop a fire truck. Daniel Harris stood nearby, chatting easily with Captain Miller. Even Richard Thornton, once her staunch ally in HOA enforcement, was laughing alongside neighbors he'd previously only communicated with through violation notices. Karen let the curtain fall back into place, turning away from the scene. Her house, once the showcase of Evergreen Valley, now stood as a monument to misplaced priorities. The community she had tried so desperately to control had not only survived without her influence, but had thrived beyond recognition. Outside, as the summer evening settled over the gathering, Daniel raised a toast to Evergreen Valley, where we finally learned that good neighbors care more about each other than about the height of each other's grass. The crowd responded with raised glasses and warm laughter, united in the knowledge that they had built something far more valuable than property values. They had built a true community. What do you think about Karen's HOA actions? Her obsession with rules over safety represents an extreme that unfortunately exists in many communities. The line between maintaining standards and tyrannical control is thinner than we might imagine. Have you encountered unreasonable HOA demands or neighbors who prioritize aesthetics over humanity? Perhaps someone reported your holiday decorations, objected to your children playing outdoors, or complained about your garden choices? Your experiences matter and build our collective understanding of community dynamics. Share your story in the comments below. Has an HOA rule ever left you bewildered or frustrated? We'd love to hear how you navigated the situation. Don't forget to subscribe for more compelling neighborhood tales that explore the complex social fabric of modern suburban life.
Thank you for watching.